Welcome to another edition of Global Conversations. My name is Andre Darmanin, and today I have someone who I've been gracious to be on her podcast before and gotten to know over the last year and a bit, Aparna Rae. So this is going to be a great conversation about data equity and, getting into that and how do organizations, provide their opportunities to bring about change through equity, because it's an important conversation that we need to have. So today, my guest Aparna is the founder and CEO of Moving Beyond and the host of Data is Love podcast, which, as I mentioned, I've been a guest of earlier. So to introduce the topic in itself, organizations of all sizes are taking a hard look at equity and inclusion initiatives to ensure their workforces are representative of the communities they serve. Data helps leaders change policies, practices, and support models, and more. But to activate the insights that DEI data provides, the leaders, along with the C-suite, should intentionally empower those who own talent-related business outcomes. An effective data-driven culture in equity and inclusion provides leaders with the information they need to make smart decisions that will move the organizations forward. So welcome, Aparna, and thanks for being my guest today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, like I said, I had the honor and privilege to be a guest on your episode. I'll put it in the show notes, our recording. And yeah, so, now that it's your turn to be on my webcast, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation. And, yes, I'm totally excited for this. And it's been a long time coming too. Given timing and all that, now we're finally doing this. So let's, let's just start with telling the audience about who you are and what you're all about. So the floor is yours, Aparna, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Who am I? I would say I'm a little bit of a third culture kid, nomad, grew up in lots of different places, was lucky to go to graduate school in Canada. So we have, some shared lived experiences there. My background is as an educator, so I spent the first decade of my career working in teacher education, in K-12, in developing learning systems for educators and also young people. And it's that sort of background that carried me for the last 20 years or so, or the last 10 years of my career, where I've shifted into more strategy work, more workplace equity and inclusion, and really bringing a deep love of learning to help organizations think about how to create culture change, and how to create culture change that's sustainable and work in ways that are outside of the, like what's trendy or sexy in the moment. And we see that so much. And I think that as somebody who is an equity practitioner, I'm sure you see all the trending words. And a couple of years ago, it was unconscious bias. And I haven't seen conversations about that recently, right? And we've moved forward. Now we're talking about imposter syndrome, or we're talking about psychological safety. And yeah, I love it. And a lot of what I do is working in ways that are going to be sustainable.
My bad. And so, as you talk about education and your, what you've done in your career, how did you really get into the fascination with data in general? Like, where did that start? How did it start? Like, just give me a little bit of indication and to that transition and why you got into this work.
How did I get into data? Well, I think, I was lucky to go to the University of British Columbia for my graduate education. And one of the things that everybody has to sit through in grad school, especially at like a big tier 1 research institution like UBC, is your methods courses. You sit through lots of qualitative methods courses and you sit through lots of quantitative methods courses, and you're going off and doing an original body of research too. And my area of study in graduate school was decolonizing pedagogy. You know, what are the equitable practices in teaching and learning for a increasingly diverse student population? And I got to do my research, some of it in India and some of it in Vancouver, in East Van, where it's incredibly diverse, right? Like there are dozens of languages spoken, people from all over the world are there. And what was true then, and I think it's also continues to be true now, is, hey, like our student population is getting more and more diverse on the basis of race and ethnicity and cultural backgrounds, gender diversity, sexual orientation, and the teacher population continues to be predominantly white women. And what are the pedagogical practices, right? Like this is the how I teach, not the curricula, which is the what I teach. So I think my fascination with data started early, and I noticed in my research that teachers, even white educators who have a strong grasp on cultural competency, showed up differently in their classrooms, and they had behaviors and habits that were very different than their peers who did not have a strong grasp on cultural competency. And they did little things differently, right? And this research, I did it like 17 years ago. But those educators wouldn't shame students for coming in late, for instance. Those educators wouldn't highlight students who maybe, you know, had missing supplies or turned in their homework a little bit late. They weren't quite as rigid. They also leveraged silence. They created space for the introverts. And also, like culturally, Vancouver has a big South Asian population and a big East Asian population as well. And culturally, in some of those groups, like you're not the first to raise your hand. Making space for them to process and find their words. And their students did better. And their students did better. Their students rated them more highly. And I think a lot of these things are true today, even for adult learners. So I started there, and then I got in, you know, like my early career right after graduate school was working in a very large community-based organization in Seattle. It was already a 100-year-old organization when I went to work there, and working with predominantly immigrant and refugee young people. And yeah, I mean, I was looking at, for instance, how many touch points do I need to have with them? And what is the quality and depth of interaction that's going to get my young person to, for instance, finish high school? Right? And look, like no offense to other folks that like go to work really hard. In my program, we went from having a 2% on-time graduation rate to like almost a 90% on-time graduation rate in just a period of 3 years, right? Yes, there's love and passion and care and the woo, and it really helps to know, hey, you know what? I need a minimum of 10 touch points with a young person, and at least 5 of them needs to be one-on-one conversations. And by the way, I also need to have 2 touch points with their teacher and 2 touch points with their parent in the course of a semester to create an enabling environment for this person and their ecosystem to push them towards graduation, and then push them and support them to think about a post-secondary option, whether it's a university or not. Like, I think personally, I'm not a big fan of like everybody gets a 4-year degree. Go be a nurse, go to vocational school, work in construction, right? All of those are legitimate, respected career paths. and from that point on, I think that there just kind of wasn't a going back. Like, you know, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And where I am now is, you know, like I get really frustrated when people are like, well, I think such and such. I'm like, but how do you know?
Hmm.
How do you know?
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
No. That's a great story and a segue into something that I've been, you know, holding on to, if you will, a little bit. So, you know, several years back when I worked in Edmonton, one of the things I wanted to touch upon, you know, as we're looking at, you know, at data when it came to transit ridership. And one of the things I
Mm,
wanted to dig deep in, and you know, I can't, I profess I'm not a data person at all, but for some reason, my curiosity was piqued and I said, hey, let me look at, you know, specifically who is riding transit in Edmonton, you know, who income levels, where they're living, et cetera, and how will that be able to improve our ridership and whatnot. But the thing is,
mhm.
I got backlash,
Yeah.
and it was more like, you know, and this was, mind you, this was, ooh, what are we now? So actually probably about 11, 12 years ago, this happened. And so now, you know, this is something that, you know, was like, oh, we don't do this here. And of course, we've heard that conversation in other areas, not just looking at data,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
also, you know, it's you know, it's the fear of finding out of where they're lacking in terms of service, where they're looking at, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and of course, you made the perfect point of, in your data, you're seeing that where the graduations are higher, and, you know, and how you can improve the pedagogy, et cetera. So
Yeah.
the question remains of, you know, why is there such defensiveness in knowing this data, and how can we, you know, so why do leaders want to hide behind the data? We're seeing this in organizations, including up to today, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you know, we've talked about this at, you know, at many times. So yeah, so why do people want to hide behind the data?
So let me reframe that. And I would say, instead of saying why do people want to hide behind data, let's look at who wants to hide behind
Right.
data,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And there are companies that are very transparent, that are incredibly transparent. You know, like when you look at something like Slack, for instance, you can find the diversity demographic reports from, I think, maybe going back 6 or 7 years, maybe even longer than that. And they publish it, and they've been publishing it for a long time on their own. There hasn't been a legal requirement for them to publish it in the ways that they do, right? The other body that has to do it is the government.
Mhm.
Is the government. They do it in Canada, they do it in the US, they do it in the UK, they do it in a lot of places. So if you work for the government, and the government as a whole also shares information, they have to by law. Who doesn't share is, I think, people that are afraid of looking bad.
Mhm. Yeah.
Who doesn't share is somebody who wants to hide, who wants to manage reputational risk. And I think that we're at a point in time with all of the workplace technologies where they're getting called out more and more. You know,
Mhm.
they're getting called out more and more. Every day I do a scan of news articles. This is like my version of doom scrolling as I'm going to bed every night, is like what's happening in the world of work, right? Like what are people talking about? And on a pretty daily basis, there's at least one article from some business publication like Vox or Inc. or Business Insider, what have you, that says XYZ memo leaked from ABC organization, right? Like Amazon employees in New York office leaked a memo that says their offices are not going to be ready for coming back to work until September.
Mhm.
And so we're at this moment in time where I'm just like, you either share it or it's going to get, like, in air quotes, like, it's going to get leaked, which basically means some employee or many employees are gonna take a screenshot and post it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just funny, you know, as you mentioned that in terms of you know, the return to work. It's like, you know, there's this, you know, everyone knows that people who are working from home work more productively, and the data shows it. But yet, you know, it's this fascination with return to work. It's a fascination with control and whatnot. You know, so let me digress a bit and return to this point a little bit. So, you know, as we as we move from hiding behind it to using this data, you know, ever
Mm-hmm.
since, you know, and I, you know, we refer going back to, you know, to George Floyd's murder and whatnot, and how there's
Yeah.
more attention towards the disaggregation of data.
Mm-hmm.
So the question remains of, you know, with this disaggregation of data, how could, you know, and it also goes back to even your, you know, your graduate research of, you know, how can we use the data more effectively and efficiently within an organization? So that's something I'm, you know, I'd like
Mm.
to hear more about from your perspective.
How can we use it more efficiently? So when I think of data equity, I think of a couple of different things, right? There's one aspect of equity that is transparency. And
Mhm.
I think you would agree with me that transparency increasingly is the currency of trust. I don't trust you because you say something. I trust you because you share something that adds value or shares control. And sharing data in a lot of ways is sharing control.
Mhm.
I'm not going to have it under lock and key, you know. So I think there's that aspect of data equity is what kinds of information do I have access to as an employee, right? So that could be all employees. Do I know what the demographic makeup of my team is, my sub organization is, my company at large is? Is it intersectional? Right? So am I just looking at aggregate numbers, or am I able to see, for instance, the demographic breakdown at different levels of the organization? I think the same applies for, and there's been a lot of push for around pay, right? Part of pay equity is transparency and the degree to which an organization is willing to share its pay philosophy, its drivers of pay, right, which is part of their pay philosophy, and actual bands, and not actual bands that are like $80,000 apart. No, like, what is the nice tight band? How do I know whether I'm going to be compensated at the top of this band or the bottom of this band, right? I think the other aspect of data equity is, are you using it to make decisions?
Mhm.
Are you using it to make decisions? Like, maybe you're like a teeny tiny 25, 30, 50-person organization, and you don't have the systems in place to even collect and or track because you don't have to by law. But if you're a few hundred-person organization or a few thousand-person organization, and certainly we know that there's no lack of data in large corporations, data equity boils down to, like, you have this information, are you using it to make different decisions? And I'm thinking about, just last night I was meeting up with a colleague who's at Microsoft, and you know, we were talking about this idea of her access as the chief of staff of a significant organization within Microsoft, her access to data on promotion velocity specifically.
Mhm.
And she said, I don't actually have insights. I can see what's happening. I
Mhm.
can see what's happening. I can see our, you know, top of funnel incoming talent, and I can see the kinds of visible diversity that exists in that group. And I see who makes up my team of directors and VPs and principals and partners and what have you, right?
Mhm.
And it looks very different.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to make I want to make different decisions. I want to push our organization to make different decisions.
Mhm.
Where are those insights? So every organization has a system of record that tends to be their like human resources information system. You have it. You don't not have it. If you're doing a bunch of hiring, you have an applicant tracking system. So you have access to lots of actually like hard data.
Yeah.
Are you using it? And then I think that there's the other side of it, which is how are people thinking, feeling, and experiencing this organization? Who doesn't feel great coming to work here? And that tends to be in the form of survey data, right? And like I think everybody has taken an employee engagement survey, an inclusion survey, comes by a lot of different names. And that's the other, I think that's the other piece of it is, am I able to use it? And do I even see it as valid?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about a certain organization that wants to, you know, we talk about employee engagement surveys. We're talking about inclusion surveys. But then I hear about the frequency of doing those surveys. And, you know, some of them I hear, you know, the general consensus has been yearly. But now I'm hearing them wanting to collect every 2 years, every 3 years. You know, I believe that there's downfalls to that. You know, and that, you know, could it be hiding behind the data? I don't know. What's your response to those organizations who want to collect them, you know, at a later date or whatnot?
I think that, I mean, I do. I think that we should be asking employees how they're thinking and feeling about work on a pretty regular basis. On a pretty regular basis. It doesn't have to be a 30, 40, 80 question survey. And it certainly doesn't have to be what some organizations do, which is a daily question. Right? Amazon famously has connections, daily question. But somewhere in the middle of that is for your organization, the right questions to ask and the right frequency with which to ask them. Now, if you're a small organization, it really is the purpose that it serves is pulse. I want to get a sense. I'm going to get a sense. There's no statistical significance here. And then I think if you're a slightly larger organization, if you have even a few hundred people, certainly if you have a few thousand people, well, now you can actually use this to make different decisions. I think it's a misnomer that people are surveyed out. People are not surveyed out. The fatigue comes from being asked to do something and then never seeing the results. Never seeing the results, and never seeing or infrequently seeing changes.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a survey where you ask me about my, let's say, return to work sentiments, which I think that, like, this is also the media's, like media, and I even think like influencer DEI folks talking about return to work being bad. No, it's not categorically bad. It's not categorically bad. I think it really harms young people to not have FaceTime with others. Like this is the space for teaching and learning.
Yeah.
This is the space for teaching and learning. If I have to be like, hey, Andre, can I schedule a 30-minute meeting with you so that you can show me how to do the blah, blah thing? Versus when we have FaceTime with people, or you walk past my desk and you observe that I'm struggling to do something, or there's an opportunity for you to connect with me. There's an opportunity for you to support me. And so, right, like it's not categorically bad, and it's not bad for all demographic groups. And introverts have really been enjoying working from home, but extroverts have suffered. They have suffered. You know, it's like how I get energy is by like seeing other people, and I never see other people. I just see like my dog and my partner. Or nothing. I just see my kitchen every day. that's really hard for folks. And so
Yeah.
if you're an organization that's going to run a survey on, people's desires for coming back to the office, and but you don't implement anything that there's a desire for,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that causes fatigue.
Yeah. And as we're talking about, equitable data or data equity and selection of data, right? What makes them feel
Mhm.
good?
Yeah.
So then there's the reverse of how the dangers of this, right? We're starting to hear people saying that, oh, with every type of survey or every type of data that comes out, there's always a negative side of things. So, for organizations to think about, the caveats or the ethical challenges with data collection for serving a certain purpose.
Mhm.
What's the obviously the caveat, but how do you combat that and think of the reverse and saying, hey, use it for the good, not necessarily for the bad. There's always going to be those people who are going to be negative, right? Oh, this
Mhm.
data doesn't tell the story, or this data tells a different story, or etc. So what are the dangers of that?
So I think the dangers in a really unhealthy workplace remains the same, whether you have data or not, is some bit of information is gonna get weaponized,
Mhm.
right? I think in organizations that don't have strong cultures of care, of humility, of really valuing employee voice, you're going to see it get weaponized.
Yeah.
You're going to see it weaponized, right? And let's put like race and ethnicity to the side. Like that's, we want to know about that particular demographic identity oftentimes. But let's say you're an organization that's collecting information about neurodivergence in your employee pool, because you read that folks that are neurodivergent and also non-native English speakers in an English dominant work environment do better, not in an open layout, but they do better in having kind of walls around them, right? It helps
Mhm.
them focus more. So if you're going to ask
Mhm.
somebody to come to work and their job requires them to focus, right? We're not talking about like a retail person who's on the floor of Nordstrom. Um, and then you ding them, right? So your employees say, yeah, I am neurodivergent, or English is not my first language, and yes, I would love to have a quiet working space. And now their manager dings them in some way, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is likely true in that organization is that they're not a great place to work even before they started asking these questions. Right? They're like probably monoculture, seeking assimilation, and yeah, I mean, my 2 cents more often than not is unless you're going to do it well, it's just better to not do it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's weaponization, or, the power of data. That's, those are things that many leaders talk about and think about. But at the end of the day, we need to create equitable, inclusive environments that have a sense of belonging, sense of trust, etc. So, in closing with our conversation, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts in how we should be able to balance the EDI with the data, with organizational values, using that data per se, with your experience? Yeah.
Mm,
What's the best way in your mind?
organization, organizational values. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's no magic bullet. There isn't like these three things will fix it. A lot of organizations have really incredible written values, or they might actually also have like really thoughtful, stated outcomes and desires around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that, look, I go back to AP English, and, you know, back in the day, your teacher would have this like stamp, like this matrix for grading that they would stamp on your paper. And they would be looking for cohesion and flow and structure and whatever, right? And a scale. How do I know where, like, right? Well, the educators already told you. They're like, I'm going to be grading you on the basis of these 5 things, and a 1 looks like this and a 5 looks like this. And I think organizations need to start doing that. If your value is collaboration, but you have all of your feedback processes, all of your communication is one way, then I think you get a 0.
Yeah.
I think then you get a 0 on collaboration, community, right?
Yeah.
What is a
Yeah.
1? What is a 5? What are you up to? And I think that it's not the work of some like sad like DEI program manager that's been pulled in to lead. Like, no, it's the work of the senior leadership team, right? They need internal accountability. And quite frankly, like their board should be asking those questions. Where are the board of directors? I know you have fiduciary oversight, but the behaviors and norms of the leaders of the organization actually have a financial consequence. And so, I mean, even alignment there, like, right? Like if as a board, either on a, you know, like for-profit board or a nonprofit board, if you're in a governance role and you care about profitability, then you should be asking these questions. And they're not asking these questions. They're just quietly paying out like settlements from employees that sue their companies.
Yeah.
Much like police departments in the United States.
Yeah.
I'm like, is your goal to protect and serve? Okay, well, you get like a -5 on both of those values. And people who are in a governance responsibility are just giving you more money to settle lawsuits.
Yeah. Yeah. So where's the efficiency? You know, going back to our, you know, where's our efficiency? Where's the you know, as they say, the money for, you know, money for value kind of thing, right? And that's what it boils down to. It's like you have the data, you know what's working, you know what creates profitability, you know all the answers. So why aren't you using the data properly to you know, it's not just about the marketing, about your products. It's about how do you make those employees who are making those products or building those environments, etc. How you having an inclusive workplace and a sense of belonging. And that's the power of the data, right? So, you know, and that's what we're trying to find. But the thing is, it's just, you know, we're still fighting, whether it's, you know, legalizing or putting regulations on disaggregation of data, or, you know, or using that data for the benefit of creating that cultural adhesion, if you will, or cohesion, I should say. You know, it's something that we should be using a lot more of, and you know, and that's why we should be, you know, we should be doing this. So you know, and you've made some great points about that, and you know, based on your experience and based on your lived experience, even that, and that's even a more important part, is how do we build our lived experiences into our workplaces. And you know, and it doesn't matter whether you're in Seattle, Vancouver, London, you know, Johannesburg, whatever the case may be, is use that data to help with your workplaces. And that's, you know, that's what we have here, and that's what you've mentioned here. And you know, I'll leave the floor to you if you have any last words in terms of this conversation that you want to leave with the audience.
Mm, well, I feel like my advice, like the CDC's mandate on vaccines and masking has evolved over the last couple of years. And I would like more and more what I'm saying to folks is honestly, like either you're in an organization that has an enabling environment, like the conditions exist for you to do this work well, or you don't, or you don't. This isn't a very wide spectrum. And if you find yourself at the end of the spectrum where there isn't a desire and investment, then don't do it. Honestly, don't do it. It's not worth jeopardizing your sanity, your health, your livelihood, if that's important to you. It's actually not worth doing it, because at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of people that are in positions of power to get on board. And the other thing that I have been saying very consistently for a very long time is that the work of DEI is not in changing hearts and minds. It's in changing systems and structures that make workplaces work for everybody.
Definitely, definitely. I couldn't agree with you more with that. And, I want to just close off by saying thank you, Aparna. I really appreciate all that you've done in this space, with your Data is Love podcast, and your views and thoughts and experiences that you put on social media. And, I'm going to continue to, comment and forward and all of that, and contribute to what you always contribute in the work and on social media, and and in the future in terms of partnerships and whatnot. So I thank you for doing this and reciprocating from and being a part of global conversations. So with that, thank you, Aparna. And one last thing, just where can we find you besides the Data is Love podcast?
If you want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn, /Aparna Rae. And yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I rarely, if ever, say no to connecting with a young person who is wanting to be or is already a practitioner, either in, like DEI worlds, HR, learning and development. And so if you want to have a conversation, yeah, I do 3 coffee chats a week. Reach out.
Okay. Thank you for this, Aparna. I really appreciate it. And until next time for our next edition of Global Conversations. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.